Hi guys, it's Miss McClellan, and today we're going to talk about the fall of the Directory and the rise of Napoleon. This is just a reminder that the Directory was the government that was established in France after the Reign of Terror and the fall of Robespierre. One of the things that the Directory did was they really increased France's military presence overseas. They did this because they wanted to satisfy the army. They wanted their support, and so if you're increasing the army and their resources, you're going to get their support. And they wanted to win popular support of the French people. And so 2 armies were sent against Austria, one in the north and then one in the south to attack Austrian-controlled parts of Italy. And that last army, the one that was sent to the south, was controlled by a young commander named Napoleon Bonaparte. And he had really outstanding success in this Italian campaign, and this sort of created his reputation as an excellent military commander, and it brought him a lot of wide public attention in France. Napoleon was from a family of minor nobility, but by the time that Napoleon was born, their fortune had dwindled and they were poor by the time that Napoleon was born. He was very talented in math, and that was an advantage for him when he entered the army. He was really interested in artillery, and that's like large weapons like cannons or big guns that are usually operated by a crew of people rather than an individual. He was more interested in that than cavalry, which is like soldiers who are trained to fight on horseback. His skills at math gave him insight into the more practical needs of an army, like training, supplies, map reading, and using guns. So he was very, very skilled at what he did, at being a military commander. During the Revolution, Napoleon was very loyal to the Revolution. So as a leader in the army, when the Revolution sort of took over France, they had new leaders. Leaders of the Revolution began to lead the army. And Napoleon was loyal to these new leaders. You had some military commanders who still remained loyal to the king, but Napoleon was loyal to his new leaders. A turning point in Napoleon's career was when Great Britain sent support to the counter-revolutionaries in a southern port city called Toulon. Napoleon sort of led that fight, and he was able to defeat the British and the counter-revolutionaries in that city, and it was a real turning point for him in his career. He was close to the Jacobins during the Revolution. He was sort of aligned with them. And when Robespierre was executed, Napoleon was arrested, but he was quickly released because they realized that they needed his military talents. And pretty soon, Napoleon was regarded as France's best general. He was loved by everyone, known by everyone. He was almost like a celebrity in France because of his military skill. After his success in Italy, when he defeated the Austrian troops there, Napoleon was encouraged to lead an expedition in Egypt. And that is because France wanted to make sure that Britain didn't expand its empire in that area. And so they wanted to make sure that Egypt became a colony for France, something that France controlled as opposed to Great Britain. It would bring a lot of prestige to France and more power. But as it turns out, when Napoleon went to Egypt, it was a failure. The British commander, Horatio Nelson, was able to destroy the French fleet, and Napoleon was defeated. However, propaganda, which is information that is released by the government that's meant to persuade you in one way or another, propaganda was circulated about the events in Egypt that essentially said Napoleon had won. And so even though he was defeated, he returned to France a hero. And so this defeat actually built up his reputation instead of harming it, because the French people were under the impression that Napoleon had been successful in Egypt, but in reality he was not. By 1799, the Directory, the French government, was not doing so hot. It had been accused of inefficiency, not being able to get things done very well or very fast, and corruption, that leaders in the Directory were breaking the rules, not following the laws. Because of this, lots of people started supporting a return of the monarchy. They said, this new government isn't working, let's just get a king back in here so things can be more stable. But then you have the Jacobins, who are still demanding a return of more radical policies. They want to return back to how things were, say, during the Reign of Terror. And so you really have a threat of a civil war here. You have half of France wanting to return to the ancien regime, the monarch, and then you have the other half who are still in favor of these revolutionary radical ideas. Napoleon saw an opportunity here. He saw that things were weak, nobody really knew what to do, and people were looking for strong leadership. So with the help of his army, he seized power in an action called a coup, which is when you forcefully remove a government from power. And immediately after, one of the directors in the Directory, who had been supporting Napoleon, began to limit the power of the Council of 500, which was one of like the councils that made laws in this government. So Napoleon forced out the council. He used military force to force them out, and he disbanded the Directory. And in its place, he established a government called the Consulate, and it had 3 assemblies. It had the Council of State that drew up laws and other documents related to the running of the state. It had the Tribunate, which discussed the bills but had no power to vote on them. And then it had the Legislative Assembly, who voted on the bills but were not allowed to discuss or change them. So you had these 3 councils, but none of them really had that much power. The real authority laid with the 3 consuls, the 3 leaders, and Napoleon ensured that he was named first consul, meaning he's the leader. He has control. And you're going to see that he's setting himself up here to take full control of France, which is something that we will talk about next time. Make sure that you are taking notes, writing a 2 to 3 sentence summary, and any questions that you may have to ask me in class. Have a great day.